A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back once again to HJN Super Graphics. So, for this instance, I would like to take a bit of a dive away from a lot of the console-based stuff and focus on a somewhat more PC or even mobile-based sort of game. A series that was in fact made possible thanks to Lithuanian developer known as Flazm. That's spelled F-L-A-Z-M. As far back as the early 2010s, when mobile games were pretty much on the rise, especially with large contenders like Half-Brick Games, Rovio, and some others coming along just as well, it seemed fair that mobile games, as well as some more modernized PC and console-related issues, would eventually be taken by various smaller companies. Companies that were certainly not like the console and PC's biggest contenders out there, whether it be Naughty Dog, Square Enix, or even the amalgamation of all of those crazy movie-based games. Regardless of what it was, Flazm was actually able to do something that was simple yet rather effective. It taught us the history of the load commerce of the United States that was made possible because of the railroad. Train Valley. A thing that came out as far back as mid to late 2010s. In 2015 through 2018, a duology of course was made with the likes of Train Valley and Train Valley 2. Flazm was not only able to bring it along to mobile devices, including phones, tablets, and whatnot, but also to the likes of PC gamers and eventually consoles. Because by 2022, Train Valley took to the consoles for the first time. And for us PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo players, and anything of the sorts, we were able to experience the great old magic of mobile gaming in full HD and made to fit on ginormous screens. And for the simplicity of it, I'd say they were actually able to do well in translating it to controllers. Yeah, going from finger tapping on the screen to controllers actually was a pretty good call in this case. Unlike with some other contenders that had to do with mobile games, they didn't exactly turn out so great. But for Train Valley, I'd say they did a good job. They basically gave us a first-hand look of the history of the railroad, especially between 1830 and 2020. Because when Train Valley 1 first came around, it was kind of unlike a good amount of different train-based games I've ever played. I've talked about the Train Sim World series, for instance, and I've even talked a bit about some other contenders that had come along just as well. But it seems fair to most of us that we do eventually get ourselves a good lease on what the mobile division of gaming has to offer. And it's fair to say, mobile gaming, as well as classic gaming, have really been coming in like clockwork, with new games released every single month. I mean, PlayStation Plus subscribers out there, there's a lot to work with. Time Splitters, Ratchet and Clank, Throwville, I mean, it's incredible how many games have come around. I really wish that they could do a lot more. Like, what if they brought along some of the older Dragon Ball titles, like Budokai and Tenkaichi, Raging Blast, anything of that sort. They would all be impressive to bring along to modern consoles. But I guess until then, we'll just have to wait and see what they think about. Anyways, though, Train Valley 1 does first start off with some tutorial basics, including on how to make track and how to guide the trains. There's a way to pause it midway in order to temporarily stop time, but that's mostly made possible for if you're either building track or destroying it, or even allowing for station dispatching as well as switching on the tracks. After all these little actions can allow for trains to go from point A to point B, or possibly elsewhere on the map. The first level alone does get us situated with the controls right away, and also to get us one train going from one destination to the next. With passenger and freight on the rise, especially with passengers going to a factory, and the factory creating things like ores, as well as farms creating things like grain. It seems by this point that the whole theme of load commerce, creativity functions, really gets down to us gamers out there. Anyone who has learned about the railroad and how well it has done such a job at opening up the country, and after nearly 200 years, it still proves to be a big, big mode of transportation. Even a lot of people still do use the trains to get around rather than bus, truck, or even their own cars. Because let's face it, if we're out there on the Empire Builder route, supposedly there's not human settlements for hundreds of miles in select areas along the route. Trust me when I say, when I've gone through the states of Dakota, Montana, Idaho, Washington, they were insane. Lots of land with little to no human settlements involved. I mean, it goes to show the railroad truly did open up the country and still seems to be a major reason for how humans even are in those areas to begin with. We can thank the Great Northern Railway and eventually Amtrak for getting us to and from those points on the route. And for many other things as well. Anyways though, Train Valley does of course ramp up the difficulty with more levels coming around, more loads, more deliveries, and of course there's time limits set upon some of them as well. So it's a little race against the clock as well as a unique challenge. How fast can you beat the game in order to unlock a star? And in terms of optional objectives that you can get as well, you can earn additional stars for that point as well. But for the thing revolving around the stars, it'll actually play a bigger role in later installments of Train Valley, which I'll get to in a bit. Well, unfortunately, I will say that I didn't actually get too far into the game itself. I've got maybe 12 levels worth of Train Valley 1 before having to call it. Yeah, didn't exactly beat the game for what it was. And the way I see it, while it is a good game, its mobile characteristics, while it does translate well to us console players, including graphical enhancements and resolution fixations so that it looks and feels like it's truly made for a console, I will say probably my biggest gripe with it is that there's times where the challenge can get so intense that boom, it all ends up going awry. So this is where we're going to have to move on to Train Valley 2 because, wouldn't you know, by the end of 2023, they not only brought along Train Valley 2 to the consoles, but they did it in a big, big way. Train Valley 2 Community Edition is officially what it's regarded as for us console players. And having had the game myself, with a good 20 bucks spent on it, I'd say every so-called minute of that game that I've played, it's unbelievable. We do of course have a primary set of levels, but the thing is that there's community levels made. Several different types actually. There's the Ruby, there's the Emerald, there's a Sapphire, and then of course there's several other categories. The thing is though, is that all of these other level sets were in fact creations made possible by the community. Not necessarily anything that Flosm themselves had actually done, although they were in fact made possible because of the many suggestions that were put out. Suggestions of course that were brought to Flosm and that they were actually made for the game itself. And while the original levels do in fact have much bigger variety and much bigger challenge and much bigger maps to work with, I'd say the difficulty in that does ramp up to quite a T as well. But at least I can agree that I've made it far enough to realize the difficulty in here is just as much as what we got in the other game. But hey, I made it pretty far there. The real beauty in Train Valley 2 Community Edition though, is with all of these other levels, I can tell you right now, I've spent at least 36 hours worth of gameplay in total. That's a lot of gameplay. And wouldn't you know, I still have a whopping 66 levels to go across all of the level sets that were put together. And it's insane. Flosm has not only outdone themselves in this particular instance, I feel like they've gone a bit overboard with this as well. Creating a game that's pretty cheap for us to get a hold of, but also containing a lot of content for us to work with, means even my GWK resources seem pretty big for what it is. But I guess one big pro that I can put out on this game as well, apart from the long gameplay, It not only makes my money worth it, but it also makes my hard drive happy. Yeah, wouldn't you know that because this is a simpler game with a smaller file size and smaller data processing, every video clip that I've ever made of Train Valley 2 Community Edition and even the first game, both of which happen to have smaller file sizes. Usually on average, a 60-minute long clip can be anywhere about 2 gigabytes, whereas 5 gigabytes on a PS4 game is usually common for 60-minute long clips. 5 gigabytes for every 60-minute long clips on PS4 games. When PS5 games, however, I could pretty much get up to 8 gigabytes because after all, the resolution in those games as well as graphical enhancements do make for larger file sizes. And on top of all that, they are in fact mostly WEBM format. And I have to have them converted to MP4 formats in order for them to work with my current editing software. And I guess for that reason, Train Valley 2 Community Edition, being a 2023 game, already gives it a lot of points. I mean, there's no doubt about it. 23 has been the best year of the decade so far. And while we have seen some ups and downs in the decade entirely, 23 was like the highest of the high thus far. I would gladly give that year a solid 8.9 out of 10.1. And with all the other years having their own individual scorings, it's pretty much up for what it is. And 2025 has thankfully been a lot better than I would have realized. But let's get to the overall ranking for Train Valley itself. For the first game, it got onto the consoles in 2022, and I picked that game up for a relatively cheap price just as well, like with the second game. But because I didn't make it all that far into the game and there wasn't at all many levels to work with by the time I called it quits, it's probably only going to get a 6.7 out of 10.1. So not exactly something that I would say is great by all means, but Train Valley 2, oh man, so much more content that I could make out of that game. And I played 36 hours worth of the game in total. With all these levels to work with, all this variety of gameplay, all of these challenges net, a 2023 title like this obviously deserves a lot more scoring than the first game did. And so, it comes out to a good 9.0 out of 10.1. Some might think it's a bit generous, some might think that it's in line with some of their own values, but while it might seem to be a bit monotonous for what it is, it's something that I never got bored of the whole time that I played it because I never knew what I was going to expect next. Maybe the challenge would involve me stopping other runaway trains. Maybe the challenge would be to avoid large mainline train while operating other trains through the sidings. Maybe the challenge would involve me having to ship priceless gold away from bandits, or maybe Christmas gifts for Santa Claus. The variety alone is stupendous in terms of all the ideas that the community came up with. It goes to show that the community knows best on how to make a game worth every single penny that you purchase. So it leads me to wonder, could I make a game that involves the entire community? Who knows? I guess we'll just have to wait and see how it all goes up on my end. Anyways though, I'll see you guys tomorrow with more of this content. And as always, do be sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side for more.